The Zimbabwean government has been in the news over a series of incidents of crackdowns and alleged human rights abuses by the country's ruling party. One example we've just shown you in our piece right now, and that of course was the piece of the arrest of Job Sikhala, a member of the legislature and an MP from the country's main opposition party, the Movement for Democratic Change. Sikhala is one of the people who reportedly went into hiding last month after the police issued a warrant of his arrest. In a similar incident, investigative journalist and human rights activist Hopewell Chin'ono, who has written extensively on alleged government corruption and human rights abuses, is still in police custody after being denied bail for the second time. Now, the leader of the Catholic Church has been summoned to a meeting following a scathing letter sent by the church to the government regarding human rights violations in the country. Nelson Chamisa, the leader of the MDC, Zimbabwe's main opposition party, joins us now. Good to have you. Thank you very much for joining us on the program.
Good morning. Thank you very much.
Last month, in a bid to intervene, we saw South Africa sending envoys to Zimbabwe, but they came back without meeting you and other opposition parties because President Mnangagwa said the meeting was scheduled for government only. Let's get your party's side of the story. Has your party, the MDC, reached out to the South African government at all?
Of course, we have done our bit to reach out to the region, in particular to South Africa, and indeed the continent. As you may be aware, President Ramaphosa is the AU chairperson. So we've done our bit to make sure that from an advocate's point of view, we cause our issue to be shared and our perspective to be articulated. And we've done so with President Ramaphosa and his team. Our hope would have been to be together as Zimbabweans, look at our problems, face our beasts, and deal with the crisis. We have made the point that the crisis in Zimbabwe is a governance crisis, a legitimacy crisis, a crisis born out of the disputed 2018 elections. So it's a contested state, it's a disputed state, a fragile state that is no consent of the people. And that is what has to be cured and solved. So we made our effort to meet with the envoys. In fact, they are the ones who requested a meeting, but we were made to spend the whole day waiting for them, only to be told end of the day that they could not meet with us after they had met Mr. Mnangagwa. Our guess is that Mr. Mnangagwa was not happy with us, saying our view.
We're looking at visuals that came from the court yesterday, and it's captured on camera the absolute abuse of people that are being beaten by the police, that not only outside of the court but on the roads. And this is something that is rather disturbing when you get to see these on social media. Talk to us about the abuse that is happening on the streets of Zimbabwe.
Well, this is an ongoing thing. As you may be aware, we have registered almost numerous 50 cases of abductions, citizens being dragged from their houses on account of belonging to the alternative or having a different viewpoint to the government, or being seen as critiques of government. We've had people being arrested, in the arrests run into hundreds, if not thousands. We've had every section of our society being subjected to some kind of tyranny and terrorism. Journalists have not been spared. You have a case of Hopewell Chin'ono. Politicians have not been spared. You have a case of MDC top leadership from the top to the lowest level. Our members are being persecuted. We have civic society, we have lawyers, we have, as we have seen, bishops even, we have the church. So literally every citizen is under siege. And this has been the case. On the streets, people are being subjected to a lot of harassment, particularly under the guise of this COVID-19 curfew and the COVID-19 measures. So you find that at roadblocks, in the streets, people just get, wantonly beaten up. So the human rights abuses, crimes against humanity have been ubiquitous in the various capitals and towns, and even in the countryside of Zimbabwe.
Yeah, you mentioned the case of Hopewell Chin'ono. We speak to the fact that it's now basically the third time that he has applied for bail, and this has not been allowed. And he's not the only journalist that has been under the situation. We know that he has been very vocal about the corruption, particularly with regard to PPEs and other issues within the Zimbabwean government. What's happening there? I mean, in terms of other governments speaking out about the clampdown on media as well, and media freedom and the arrest of journalists?
Well, this is a classic case of abuse of the law. Instead of the rule of law, we have rule by law. When you have somebody who is just being accused, who has not been tried, almost spending close to about 2 months now in prison or in jail for something that is just an allegation, and for having said something that is true, for having factually reported as a journalist what is obtaining on the ground, instead of dealing with the criminals or the accused people who are actually responsible for corruption, they are shooting the messenger in trying to dwarf and kill the message. Hopewell Chin'ono is just a representative of the many journalists, the many media practitioners who continue to face this kind of abuses. But of course, it goes beyond just journalists. I've already told you of the rank and file of the MDC Alliance. As we speak, a lot of them are actually in hiding. A lot are on the run, being persecuted in their homes. They are approached at night, hounded out, some being embarrassed, harassed, on account of just being MDC Alliance. This defeats the whole essence of us having been a liberated country and having attained our freedom. This is not what the liberation struggle was all about. Yeah. This is not what freedom was all about. Freedom is about the ability to freely express oneself, and that is what Hopewell Chin'ono represents. So to incarcerate him, and of course to try him before the trial, and to make him serve a sentence before he has been convicted, is actually an injustice of monumental proportion.
Yeah, we mentioned it in the introduction as well. We saw the Catholic Church, the Vatican's representative in Zimbabwe, sending a rather scathing letter as well to Mnangagwa and the government in general, basically just talking about the issues that are being committed by the government. There are corruption, they say, is choking the economy, compromising our justice system. While there is acknowledgement, there hasn't been equally a serious demonstration by government to rid the country of the scourge. The letter goes on, it's rather scathing. However, Mnangagwa has now called him for an emergency meeting, describing this letter from the church as inappropriately prescriptive and grossly disrespectful. It is most unfortunate when men of the cloth begin to use the pulpit to advance a nefarious agenda for detractors of our country. That's to quote what he has said. I mean, if we look at the reaction from the church towards what's happening within the government, I mean, let's get your views on this. And I mean, where to from here if an urgent meeting has been called with the church from the president of Zimbabwe?
Well, let's just look at this in the context of South Africa and the fight against the apartheid regime. We had luminaries like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who took a stand against apartheid. It has always been the fundamental role of the church as the conscience guardians, as the moral voice in a society. They speak against evil. They speak truth to power. And what we are seeing with the Catholic Church, and indeed with the Zimbabwe Council of Churches, the Evangelical Fellowship of Zimbabwe, and the broader church body in Zimbabwe, they are also just speaking on their own behalf, but also on behalf of their congregants, on behalf of conscience, on behalf of society, because pastors, bishops, prophets are in the communities. They know the suffering of the people. The human rights abuses that are happening are all known, are all quite prevalent, are all being witnessed by our bishops. So what you have then seen from Mr. Mnangagwa is this inability to be humble enough to know that when truth is said, what you need is to seek guidance and wisdom, advice and counsel of those who are seeing things differently, instead of accusing them, labeling them and condemning them, beginning to call them names. That's not leadership. When you point your finger at your critics, at your opponents, you are actually forgetting that 4 of your fingers are actually pointing at yourself. So this whole blame and condemn game, label and condemn game is actually part of the failed leadership that we see in Zimbabwe. Instead of attacking, excoriating and vilifying, these pastors, these bishops, what Mr. Mnangagwa must be advised to do is to give them an ear, hear their views, and then try to map a way forward. Precisely what we have been saying from the alternative, to say, let us sit and address issues together as Zimbabweans, address issues in the context of dialogue, because we must give peace a chance. The only thing that will move this country forward is the unity of its citizens.
Mr. Chamisa, in terms of talks, let's see, how many times have you actually met with ZANU-PF? I mean, there have been many calls from differing society or different parts of society and organizations saying that there need to be talks between ZANU-PF and the MDC. How many times have you met with them to discuss these issues?
We have shouted our voices hoarse. I've made numerous calls. I've requested Mr. Mnangagwa and ZANU-PF to smoke a peace pipe. They've not been coming to the party. I've said we have to bury the hatchet. We have to make sure that we draw a line in the sand and not continue the acrimony, the disharmony that has always been there, the hate language that is in our society. We need to move a step forward. We can't have the Mugabe-Tsvangirai dispute, the ZANU-PF MDC, binary conflict. We need to move forward and say, how do we locate each other? How do we find a consensus point, national consensus and national convergence on our issues? Unfortunately, I have not been able to meet with Mr. Mnangagwa. The last time I met Mr. Mnangagwa was on the campaign trail. And of course, when we were in Parliament, we've not been able to even have a conversation, not even a phone call. Yet I've told Mr. Mnangagwa that you want to re-engage the international community. You cannot have an international re-engagement if there's no national re-engagement. Let's engage nationally. Have a common voice, a common platform. Once we do that, we can then go to the international community, ask them to underwrite and scaffold our own initiatives as a people and as a nation, so that Zimbabwe becomes once again the jewel of Africa and indeed the world.
What about SADC? What about SADC's involvement?
Well, SADC has its own challenges. I mean, they have not been as involved. We're hoping that the meeting that was held last week would have given due attention to our problem. We have said we believe, as MDC Alliance, in African solutions to African problems. We don't want those who are outside the continent to come and point at problems or find solutions for us. We need to find a leadership that gives dignity and pride to African initiatives. And that's why we've really counted on the regional bloc, on the continental bloc, to really provide that important umpire's role and the referee's role to sort of adjudicate over our issues. But we've seen that the approach by SADC is to hear no evil, see no evil, say no evil, and of course begin to continue this solidarity of leadership, the trade union of those elites in leadership, instead of the community of peoples, the community of those in Africa, so that we begin to have one common voice in addressing our common problems. So we are a bit disappointed that SADC has not provided the necessary leadership, but we continue to knock at the doors of SADC because they are our regional body.
Just finally, Mr. Chamisa, before I let you go, I need to ask you the issues within your own party. I mean, let's clarify the position. After the judgment in May that the MDC Alliance is not even a political party, and even bringing into question you as president of the party, what has since happened, and has the status of the MDC Alliance been clarified as yet?
Well, those are shenanigans and tomfoolery games by Mr. Mnangagwa. We know that Mr. Mnangagwa is behind all this, trying to obviously place his hand on all these aspects. He has never forgiven us for defeating him in an election in 2018. Of course, he was endorsed by the Constitutional Court, but he does not have the mandate of the people. The people are very clear. And because he doesn't have the mandate of the people, he would want to take a revenge on the MDC alliance by decimating the MDC alliance, by making sure that he destroys the MDC alliance. But the unfortunate thing, in as much as they've taken our party headquarters, they've taken our party finances, they've taken our members of parliament, they've taken literally everything, including wanting to take away the name. But they cannot take away the support we have, the confidence we have from the people, because our support is headquartered in the hearts and minds of Zimbabweans, and not in buildings, and not in some other things, including the courts, where they are trying to engineer and re-engineer the opposition. They want to create an opposition in their own image, in their own imagination. They want a phantom opposition, a pliant opposition. We will not be there. We are not going to submit to their will. The people are solid. MDC Alliance is alive and kicking, and we are going to continue to fight for democracy and a return to legitimacy and democracy in Zimbabwe.
All right, Nelson Chamisa, President of the Movement for Democratic Change, thanks very much for talking to us. That, of course, is the main opposition in Zimbabwe, talking about the country's socio-economic and political impasse amid allegations of government crackdown, human rights violations, and inflation sitting at something like 837% currently. All right, Sakina, we need to wrap up this